Hi guys, welcome. We have a very special video today. I'm here with Kraig, who is a 2000 rated player. Actually, that's not enough of an introduction. He's got from 800 to 2000 from 2019 to today. He's gone from 800 to 2000, which is frankly ridiculous. Kraig, how did you do it?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it was just, I guess, when I just first started playing, I was actually 600, believe it or not. And yeah, just started really getting obsessive with the game. And I actually hired my own coach early on as well. So between that and also just doing, I think when I looked at my chess.com profile, I'd done 20,000 puzzles. So tactics is like a massive part of the improvement, I think, at the intermediate level. So between tactics, studying end games, and having some lessons from a coach, that played a big part of it.
Wow, that's a ridiculous amount of graft and very well deserved. So today Kraig is gonna, I think, go through some of my old games and absolutely tear me apart, and I'm looking forward to it, try and unlock that next level of thinking.
Cool, excellent. So yeah, so just for some context for your viewers, you reached out to me a couple of days ago. So I'm going to try and give you as much help as I can in a short space of time. Obviously, when it comes to giving lessons, ideally, if it was over a longer period of time, we would build in exercises and sort of tasks during the lesson to try and practice and go through. But because we're going to try and cram as much as we can in one lesson and give you as much as you can to take away with you. And I'll give you a few pointers to what to spend your own time on as well when you go offline. But the first thing I always do is I run like a sort of diagnostics check, if you like, on a new student. So first thing I did with yourself was I went to a website called openingtree.com, which you might already see on my screen share. And I plugged in your details, so your username, and then from here we can sort of filter on your starting positions with white and black. This is just essentially a database of your games that you've played online. And what I did is I just filtered on opponents that were rated your rating or above. Okay. Because like with any sort of review of this, if you've ever improved over time, if you just run a report all time, you'll get a lot of those games when you were like basically beating quite a lot of people on your way up to where you are now. So we're just focusing on your current rating range now onwards. So there was about 90 games in the database. I don't know if you're familiar with this site, but essentially you just toggle onto your views and this will give us a drop down of, so I noticed you're an E4 player.
Yeah.
So in total, and this is natural, generally you'll be 50-50 once you stagnate at a level for a long period of time. But if you're sort of peaking at your all-time high, you're going to naturally have a bit more losses than wins because you're coming up against opponents that are just organically stronger. So right now, just based over the last 90 games, you've got 51 losses, 34 wins. But again, these are all against opponents who are equal to or greater strength than you are.
Sure.
So after E4, I noticed, well, I actually have already done some prep here, which doesn't look as clean, but I'll just jump over to this Word document. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially what this tells me, and I'll sort of explain this so that it's a bit easier. When it comes to E4 games, when your opponent replies E5, you're winning 37.5% of the games against opponents equal to or higher rated than you. And this is a breakdown of the most common continuations. So if your opponent enters into the Roy Lopez type setup, you're actually winning half of those games against opponents of your own strength.
Yeah.
Now, if they're playing some kind of offbeat opening like D6 or knight F6, which is a Petrov or the Russian game, this is probably where you're starting to struggle a little bit, but the game sample size is really small. But I've got some tips for this segment. Basically, whenever your opponent doesn't play knight C6, we can look into that. This is just good for yourself to know. Like, it's useful for when I did this study myself. It basically picks out like 2 or 3 key openings that I just have to look into a little bit more to basically equalize in those variations. Again, when you play E4 and you come up against the Sicilian, again, when they play the classical Sicilian, which is the knight C6 variation, which if I toggle back to this, which is basically this classical sort of variation, you're actually scoring really well here. And from my analysis, you were winning basically 54% of your games. So more than half of the games, when you arrive in that position, you're winning them. One thing I did think was worth pointing out is if they play this setup, which is a more modern variation of Sicilian, which normally leads to things like the Najdorf, etc. I've sort of aggregated it all down at the bottom here. So these are the three main openings that I would recommend you sort of that we can look at. But in the Petrov, the sum total of the games that I've looked at over the last couple of months, you've won 2 out of 11. All right.
Yeah.
And for the modern Sicilian, you've won 3 out of 11. But when it's a classical, you're actually winning like more than 50%. So there's obviously something specific to the structures that arrive from these positions that we can just take a look at. And then the Scandi is the third sort of least successful opening, where it's 68%. You're sort of coming off worse, and that's over a better sample size. So these are the three ones that I would highlight, at least for you to look at. One other sort of bonus that I would point out is when it comes to you playing the French defence, when you play knight f3 on move 2, you're winning 28% of your games, but when you play d4, you actually win every game. So that's something that if you're not aware of that, or you sort of mix it up, when they play this, if you play this, you've won every game.
Wow.
If you play this, you're actually losing like by far more games. Again, it's probably just to do with the structure. But that's something that you can just sort of remember, like autopilot. Like if you ever get this, you're just more naturally able to intuitively come up with a good plan in this position.
Sure.
So that's like one bonus. But yeah, coming back to the openings. So I've got a whole load of observations which I'll give you. And again, obviously, when it comes to looking at openings, we're only really looking at the first few moves, because thereafter you're going to branch off into too many different variations. So the purpose of looking at your openings isn't to give you any concrete lines, like 5 or 10 lines to memorize.
Sure.
It's really just like if you've got the choice of 2 moves, in 1 move you're always losing, and 1 move you're always winning. It's just to really point that out so that you know yourself just to always play that move that's going to give you a more familiar position, such as in that French example and in this Sicilian example as well, where the modern versus the classical. But do you know yourself, like before we showed you this, was there any openings that you were sort of aware of that gave you trouble, or was it not as concrete or clear as that?
I feel like there's something missing in my brain when it comes to the Scandi, because I keep getting in these positions where I've got a massive lead in development. I feel like I'm crushing, and then somehow they bounce back. And I think that's like what the Scandi's like.
Yeah.
But it's so annoying.
Yeah, the Scandi can be really tricky. I actually play. So one sort of thing I would give, like if I could go back and tell myself this right at the start, when it comes to looking at an opening that you're losing at, or you're just not that strong at, I would probably choose to memorize or look at like the second or third best line rather than the main line. Because whenever you play like into the main line, if the person's playing the Scandis, because they're obviously going to know that line, whereas you might not know if you don't play it yourself.
Yeah.
So what I did personally with the Scandi is I actually, if I load my own name into this, you might see it. And this is just very quickly, anecdotally, what I did.
Sure.
So Scandi would start like this and this, and we just need to let it load up to see the sort of moves that come in here. But after this, I actually play this line, and it's not loaded up the amount of moves that's actually happened yet.
Yeah.
But we'll let this sort of load up and see over time. But this is like a well-known sort of gambit, which is really tricky. But for the white side, you only have to memorize like 3 moves after this, and it's usually it's what you play. It can catch out higher rated players basically, because I'm not used to seeing this, and it doesn't actually really take much away from you. But the sort of main trap in this line, and you'll see that it will load up, and I'm actually winning more and more games. I think on chess.com it's like 80% win rate from here. But basically, you play this and they take. And you jump in here, and the idea here is that you're just going for a fork straight away.
Yeah.
All right. The queen's sort of misplaced. So 9 times out of 10, they'll generally come over here just to protect this thing. And then you bring the bishop out, and usually they'll play one of these 2 moves to kick the knight away, which is a blunder, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So if they play this, you may or may not have seen this, but it's like a well-known motif where you go out.
Yeah.
And wherever the king goes, you're delivering a check, and you pick up the queen, basically. So that's something I think I learned it from Eric Rosen. So he's been like the inspiration for a lot of like the offbeat openings I play.
Okay.
And it's just like really tricky, really gambity, and it's just black will very rarely ever see this. But if you're playing it every time, like I am, you can see here, you'll win twice as many games as you do. See, that's actually almost 3 times, just because it's the same thing you play over and over again.
Yeah.
And had I just decided to pick the most, like the main line, for example, you're going to be playing games where this guy will know everything
Yeah.
that you're doing. So that's like one sort of minor piece of advice is whenever you identify an opening that you're really suffering in, if you do want to get better at it, you're probably going to be more successful just learning like the third or fourth main line response that's still playable, and it might give you some more success there as well. But that's something that you can replay over, and you can look on the openings database and sort of play out that move order and see what all the variations are. But that B4 move is quite effective, I've found, when I've introduced it myself. And as for the Petrov and Russian game, I'll just very quickly run through that with you, and then we'll jump into your actual rapid games that I've analysed. But again, just coming back to E4, E5, and this and this. Now, we're actually on my database, so let me just very quickly toggle back to yours.
Thanks for all the work you've put in, Craig. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, no worries. This is pretty good. My main job is a data scientist, so I quite like looking at data from. That's basically what I do for a living, looking at data from spreadsheets, and it's amazing. Like the conclusions you can draw even from chess, just looking at your history is quite useful. So again, we'll just go back to like maybe a couple of minutes ago. But I would always suggest this is always useful to do if you're only looking at games where you're playing against top players, because if you bring in every game all the time, you're going to get a lot of like bad data in there from old games where you've just crushed someone, like irrespective of the opening. So you just want to look at games where you're playing against people who are your own rating or higher. But we'll just wait for the Petrov to load in here. And okay, so one thing I didn't do is I didn't filter out bullet games just right now, but I did for that old spreadsheet. So that's why in the Word document I've got, your success in the Petrov isn't as 50-50 as it is right now. Maybe you've played it in some bullet and you've managed to still win regardless. But just looking at this is like the main line, I guess. Queen coming out and the knight jumping back and the knight jumping out. Usually, basically here, I mean, we don't need to go into it too much, but the main move generally is just queen out, right? And that knight's going to jump back generally. And then you just get this sort of tension here. And I don't know how often you like exchanging your queens. I don't know if I see an awful lot of that from when I've watched some of your games. But it's completely fine here just to continue as normal. You don't want to take their queen, because what basically happens is they just become a move ahead. It's like they're playing as white now because they're one move ahead. So normally here I just continue to develop and then let them exchange queens with me, for example. And now it's like I'm a move ahead again. But that's like the main way to play it. I know it's like we're not going into it massively there, but that's just like the first few moves to remember. And then you won't get these sort of complicated positions where queens are still on the board and you're in an opening that you're not familiar with. And there's always like tactical shots that can happen there when you're just not familiar with the opening at all.
Yeah, I think I was trying to complicate because I find it boring exchanging queens, and I saw the engine play that weird bishop move, bishop d3, and it's weird. It blocks your pawn, but I did see an engine say that once, and I've just tried it. But it's one of them engine ideas which I don't actually understand any more of it. It's just one move, so it's sort of useless.
Yeah. Cool. But yeah, and then in the modern Sicilian, like this is like a massive sort of body of theory here. So we'll just very quickly fly into like what to do generally speaking. And again, we've not filtered out like bullet games or blitz games, so this might include some of the faster stuff and some of the stuff from earlier on. But I'm not sure what do you and when I was looking at your own database as black, you only play either the Caro or the Sicilian yourself. So I don't know if you've just now exclusively swapped to the Caro, or do you still mix in the Sicilian personally?
I've completely switched to the Caro. I might go back to the Sicilian, but for now I'm just trying to master it.
The Caro's fine. Caro's a good opening as well. But I was just going to ask, whenever you did play the Sicilian, what opening did you play? Did you play this one, or did you play the knight one out, or was it different?
It was normally like the pawn out and then the dragon set up with the G6.
Yeah, all right, the dragon setup.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. But yeah, I mean the general idea with the Sicilian, I noticed that you kind of throw this sort of, it's like a Alpine style hybrid Sicilian with this knight here.
Yeah.
And that's still fine as well. I personally, I mean, obviously it doesn't really matter what I do personally, but I always just like opening up the center as quickly as possible, especially when you're playing these E4 games and you're just trying to open up and attack. So that's the move that I've tended to play. and just go for the usual, like the standard sort of idea where you're basically like just doing the whole like opposite side castles and then pawn storming up.
Mm.
Uh,
You seem like quite a tactical player, Craig. From what I actually analysed a few of your games before this, just to see what you
yeah,
like. And I saw that weird move in the Scandi with B4, and I wondered what that
yeah,
was all about.
yeah.
Would you say
Something.
I think I might be maybe more positional than you. You're really tactical, but
Definitely, yeah, I would agree. And there's some suggestions I've got for you, like and just some observations on your openings. And I'd say sometimes it's like you tend to mix in positional play and a tactical opening, which gives your opponent like a free shot at developing and gives them more chance to potentially come and attack you. Because I've noticed, and again, I don't want to get too off track, so we'll come on to this, but you've got quite a habit of playing moves like D3 and A3 when there might not necessarily be a threat incoming, but that forfeits the opportunity for you to bring out another piece playing like a move like A3, and it allows them to sort of build their initiative quite quickly in some occasions. I've got a few sample games to show afterwards, but yeah, I've noticed that you would I would say you play quite solid, where it's like just making sure everything's protected and there's no inroads into getting towards you, which is completely fine to play. Um, yes, I'm just a slightly different type of player. I would say I'm more trying to go for attack basically, which is also, I mean, both ways are fine to play. Sometimes though the position sort of dictates that you have to attack regardless, or you'll be too slow, or you'll have to defend regardless. So it's not always black and white, like you have to only be one or the other. But there's a few positions that shall show where it does probably warrant you being a bit more aggressive. And I'll show a few sample positions at the end of this.
that's my feeling too. I sort of know I'm being a bit too defensive, but often with time pressure, I just end up instead of trying to calculate because that's what
Yeah,
takes away my time. I just play like
yeah,
a quick solid move.
yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. So, and then, yeah, so we've looked at the Scandi, and as I said, I don't want to dive too much into this and take up too much of the lesson time, but I would just give you those to take away and say, look, the Petrov, the Sicilian with the D6 move, and the Scandi are just three key openings where like you're consistently sort of not comfortable basically.
Sure.
Whereas the other ones like almost irrespective, if you face the French, if you face the Caro, you're like 50-50, which is great. That's basically what you'll always be 50-50 because you'll always be playing against people your own sort of rating.
Yeah.
But for these, because these are still quite popular openings, these are just the three I would say, like go away and just Google this or search it up on YouTube. Just look at a lecture or just look on the openings database.
Yeah.
Like Lichess is pretty good for that, where you can just toggle through like all the moves and see like what people are playing and try and understand why that's being played. And it's quite useful. Like if you think actually I don't know why people play this, I would want to play this. You can play it and just see why it doesn't work, because you'll often see like the subsequent moves that other people play and if they're punishing it or not. But that's a way you can sort of use the openings database to study. But obviously, it's good to tie that in with going onto YouTube and just typing in that lecture. That's what I did.
Yeah.
So I used to get destroyed pretty much consistently in the Caro-Can. That was my worst opening up until about 2 months ago, where pretty much every opening was like 50-50 for me, except the Caro, where I was like 35% win rate. And that's just because it's just one of these openings where I just never really understood the middle game plan, and I sort of just put the effort into learning that one opening, got that back up to like 50-50. Now it's just made everything a lot more polished, and I can then focus my time on like tactics, end games, that sort of stuff. But yeah, so that's just a couple of quick observations I've got in your openings database. As black, I looked at your openings as black, and yeah, everything's actually looking pretty good there. So against E4, I didn't look at D4 games too much, but against E4, you're playing the Caro-Can, you're winning more than half your games. And normally when you approach this sort of like 55-56% mark, that means you're actually like pretty strong in that area.
Yeah.
One thing I would say for your Caro, because I dived into that a little bit further, when they play the advanced variation of the Caro, that's the only time that's basically when you're not winning the 56, like the other 40% of the games.
Okay.
So I reviewed 11 games where the opponent entered the advanced variation. You lost 64% of those. But whenever they played something that wasn't advanced, you won every one of those games in rapid. It's a small sample size, but it still just goes to show like what types of structures you're personally comfortable in. So again, if you just wanted to dive into your own Caro can theory a bit better, only look at the advanced because that's the only time you're ever not dominating, basically.
Yeah. Would you say I'm worse in maybe closed positions then?
That could be that, or it could again just be that you just maybe don't know the plan to like because often it just depends on the type of player you are, but maybe you're not judging the pawn breaks correctly, or maybe you're letting them close down when you should when there's an opportunity to not allow that to happen. It's probably too vague for me just to give general advice without because I never really dived into the Caro specifically. If I was doing like so, this is all just based on like the database statistics. If I was to dive into those specifically, then I could maybe give you more concrete feedback. But I wanted to focus on just like your last 10 rapid games for the sort of core part of this.
Sure.
But again, that's just something like another bullet point for you to take away. So your black openings are generally pretty good. I am quite in favour of sticking with one opening if it works for you. So I wouldn't even necessarily recommend you to like go off and study a lot of Sicilian theory if you don't even play it that like if you're that successful with the Caro, you can learn one or two to sort of mix it up for yourself. But if you're winning pretty much with the Caro more or less every time, then that's obviously a really good opening. And I also think just for some reason, like for me personally, the Caro is just awkward to play against if you don't really if you don't know the lines properly.
I'm passionate about the Caro now, so I think I'll stick with it for a while. And I didn't want to plug your lessons at the beginning, Kraig, because I'd never had one before. But just judging off this, like. Go check out Kraig, guys, because a fantastic amount of value right there. And he gives his first lesson free, so yeah, no harm in checking him out. I'll link in the description.
Nice one, I appreciate that. So that's basically the just rough opening observations. And I probably wouldn't do this type of analysis with like an outright beginner because for your viewers that are watching that are maybe sub like 1200. Really, like the opening choices look like I would just recommend at that level you just stick to one or two sort of pet openings and just play those over and over again and just get comfortable with them. Like I wouldn't be looking at like the tricky like B4 line in the Scandi, for example. At that level, you just want to solidify. But I think when you're at your rating, you're sort of in the sort of mid like 1600 plus in chess.com, like polishing up the little openings here or there, just where you're weak. It just helps. It just is one less thing to worry about. And you can focus on the main stuff like the middle game planning and tactics and that sort of stuff.
So Kraig, a tough question now, and you don't have to give a serious answer. But I did a poll the other day on my YouTube channel saying, "Do you think I can hit 2000?" And most people thought maybe I was going to do it in the next like 2 or 3 years. Do you think it's possible?
It's definitely possible. It's really just about how much time you put in personally. And like in terms of like timelines, again, it varies differently. It's not really just a case of because I know some beginners, and I know you're not a beginner, but some beginners online tend to sort of think about like how many games you need to play. But it really is just about time, how much time you're willing to put in, how much time you can put in. For me, I think the time gap between your rating and 2000 for me was probably maybe 9 months or so. I hit 1900 quite quickly from 1600, but I took quite a long time. If you look at my rating graph, I basically sat at 1900 for like 6 months before I eventually just got up to 2000.
Wow. What was the difference there? Do you know?
I think it's just like, I don't know. I think just a lot of people are sort of clogged up at like the 1900, 2000 level in chess.com rapid. It's not like Blitz where you've got like this, like people continue to play Blitz all the way up to like 3000 plus. Rapid, I think, kind of bottlenecks, and there's quite a lot of like people who are overrated or underrated at that level, and it's just quite difficult to navigate. And I think once you break it, you're sort of clear of that. But yeah, I just found that a lot of people at 1900, when you click on their profile, their Blitz rating can be anything from like 2300 to like 1600. So it's like just wildly varies the type of player you'll be playing, because the rapid ratings aren't as like people don't play it as much, so it's like people are just overrated or underrated provisional scores basically. So there's a lot of that to deal with, I think, as well at the higher level. But yeah, so that's the openings. Any questions or any sort of things that you want to ask based on that, and I'll send you this after the call so that you just get these bullet points and these openings sort of written down that you can check out yourself. But that was basically the what I sort of primarily pulled out of that. I do actually have some feedback on your Roy Lopez though.
Okay.
So I'll just give you that before we leave because I know that seems to be the opening you play most often. So you've played it sort of 79 times against people of your own rating, so you can see sort of basically 50-50 more or less, but at the higher level maybe slightly lagging behind. But you can see here, notice if your opponent plays d6, you actually lose like 80% of the games. You see that on screen
Wow.
share?
Yeah.
And a6 as well. So it's like these sort of subtle moves seem to like if they play something that allows you to continue with your own plan, you're winning almost all the games. But if they play a6 or d6, which are two of the most common moves, well between this as well, you suffer a little bit. So and I think this is part of it. I do think this is like ultra passive. So I looked at the openings database here, and let me just double check my numbers are right. Yeah, so and from this position, players over 2000 are 27 times more likely to play d4 here
Yeah.
than d3. 27 times more likely. And I think in the Roy Lopez sort of setup, you really want to just blast open the center. And this is just me speaking at my rating level. Obviously, I'm sure like higher level, like masters, will have more sort of a concept of like what the overall plan is. But this sort of mindset has been good for me to get up to 2000. And my sort of attitude is always just trying to fight for the center, rip open this as quickly as possible. I also will take this knight as well whenever I get the opportunity to, although I wouldn't recommend you just do that if you don't want to play like that. I always do this to sort of damage the pawn structure, and then it gives me these sort of weak targets to go after in the middle game. So these are just, it gives me a plan basically to go after.
Sure.
Whereas I think with d6, you allow them just to sort of stop this sort of tricky pin. And then if they challenge your bishop, you're running away with the bishop again. And it's just like, and sometimes you're bringing the bishop back here, and it's like almost like a waste of a tempo where you're moving the bishop back and not retreating it in the classical way to maintain sort of like a line of sight over here. But sometimes you bring it all the way back down, which is sometimes fine as well. But more often than not, I would just say that you would probably benefit from, for this opening, you just want to be a bit, and actually the only time you have played this, you've won 2/3 of the games. Whereas when you don't play it, you can see there three wins, 16 losses. So this just goes to show, I think d3 in this type of position is probably a little bit too passive. You give your opponent too much freedom to respond how they want to respond.
Yeah.
Just because it's slightly too slow. So I would recommend either taking or just shooting for d4 immediately, or even castles as well.
I told myself this the other day, Craig. I realised I was doing that too much as a sort of lazy, no, I didn't want to calculate, so I'll just push one up. But I said this in a recent video, like if you can put 2 pawns in the centre, do it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to force myself to stick by that. And thanks.
Yeah, I would highly recommend it. And as like anytime you start experimenting with a new variation or a new opening, you will probably lose more than you'll win because it's not intuitive yet. But I would just say if you do start playing d4 and you still feel like you can't, like there's just a lot of things happening, I would just persevere with it for like a few games. Like nothing bad will happen. Like there's no worst case scenario. You might drop 10 rating, 20 rating points or whatever, but in the long term, I think this type of move will benefit you. And like a lot of this Roy Lopez lines will transpose into the same sort of position anyway, depending on the move order. And d4 is quite a common, like if you look at the database and play pretty much like any move that black will play, d4 will be up there with like the most common response, like in a lot of the variations compared to d3. So d4, you just basically, there's a couple of reasons. One is you want to castle and start when your king is not castled. You want to bring the rook out and just start trying to clear everything out the way to attack the king. That's one sort of standard plan. So you want to break open the structure, like the center straight away. But yeah, also this whole taking the knight, the engine might not say it's like amazing, but it will still say it's equal. But practically speaking, when you damage the pawn structure like this, I know they say that you don't want to give away a bishop for a knight for no reason, but in this type of setup, I do think the reason is justified because you do damage the pawns. And I personally have quite a lot of success in it just by playing this kind of way. And also it's less memorization as well, like almost pretty much no matter what they play.
So Craig, what openings do you play?
Yeah,
Is it the Rue Lopez and
yeah, yeah. So I can quickly load up mine just for some context. But yeah, primarily I will play the Roy Lopez as my main opening if I get the chance to. So if they play e4, e5, and then the knight's out, yeah, Roy Lopez is what I'll exclusively play. If they play something else, then I'll just have to play into what they're playing. But as white, I'm just e4 exclusively, and Roy Lopez is the only opening I've studied really properly, like beyond like 5 or 10 moves. Everything else, like that Scandi trick or against the French or the Carroll, I've only really looked at like the first 10 moves just to survive the opening, and then I'll just sort of work out what to do like on my own from there. But the Roy Lopez is one where I've probably taken it a bit further. But you can see here in my opening database, if they play this, and this, it's like 100 out of 100 games is just Bishop b5, basically.
yeah?
And again, no matter what they play, like you can see every game I'm just taking, pretty much. It almost doesn't matter what they do.
Yeah.
But that's just my own personal preference. So I wouldn't say just do that because I do it, but it's just it gives you like this consistent plan where every game you're almost playing the exact same thing. There's like lots of tactics from this position that are available to you, and it's always the same plan for you. So you're always in your comfort zone, whereas the opponent's never not is not always in their comfort zone because for one you're not playing the main line, and for two you're just giving them this awkward pawn structure to deal with for the whole game.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned that I sometimes play maybe h3, a3 unnecessarily. Now in the Rue
Yeah.
Lopez, I absolutely hate when that light square bishop comes and pins the knight on g4. Is it
Yeah.
in this situation worth playing h3?
It depends when. So, for example, if we just go into the main line here and here, right? This is so far just a standard move. It just depends what you play next. But just say you castle and they play here. It's not too bad to deal with this, I don't think. As long as you just know what to do. There are complications that can happen. For example, this is like a very famous fishing pole trap that you might have seen before. You can't take that or you lose. But normally, basically, what I do, regardless, is I'll just try and reinforce that knight with a move like d3 is fine in this position, and bring the knight out, and then just free the queen up. And if they take, you can just recapture with your knight. That's generally the type of plan I try and go for in these types of positions. If you are pinned, I personally don't prophylactically stop the pin, but you can. That's just you can look at that. You can look at some of the database lines and just see what happens from there. But you can definitely play that. But if there's nothing ready to come there, I wouldn't waste the move by doing it. Only do it like maybe now you could play it as I just said because it's ready to happen. But if it's as early as here, for example, like I wouldn't be thinking of h3 this early because there's too much going on to capitalize on. Because I have sometimes seen that you'll still potentially play like an a3 move when there's maybe not a knight ready to jump into it yet, and just to take away the square in the future. But ideally, this is where you want to be trying to open up the center castle and get the rook on e1 and start going up, like just start trying to do something in the middle. Sure. That's like the standard sort of plan anyway. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for people struggling with time pressure? So I saw someone the other day said try and stay within 1 minute of your opponent.
Yeah, I don't really have I don't really play like that. I basically, I mean, ultimately, like if this is another benefit of playing the same opening, you can basically blitz out once you get used to playing the same opening over and over again. You'll be blitzing out that opening very, very quickly, and especially if you're familiar with it and your opponent isn't, you'll get a big time advantage there. One thing I noticed just when I was looking over your games, because I looked through some of your YouTube videos, because sometimes you come into time pressure occasionally, and I think that happens because obviously part of it is you're obviously broadcasting and letting the audience know, but you spend a lot of time in the opening critically analysing what your opponent's replies are, which is excellent. But when you play the opening over and over again, you basically know what those lines are sort of subconsciously, so you won't have to sort of like blunder check for those moves. But as you get to the middle game and the end game, you don't take that same quality of time, I've noticed, as you do in the opening. which sometimes it'll pay off if your opponent blunders. But basically, my philosophy when I'm playing is I'll try and blitz out the opening as quickly as possible, provided I know it, because obviously I'm playing the opening that I know, and I'll use as much of my time for the middle game because you need to use the time for calculating. So yeah, get confident or familiar with the same opening over and over. That will allow you to play it quicker and quicker, and you get to save a lot more time for the middle game, which is probably when you actually really need to calculate, because there will always be positions in the middle game that you're not familiar with. You need to calculate a tactic or an exchange. But in the opening, if you've played it over and over again, unless a move surprises you, you're like, well, I've not seen that before. I need to slow down and see this. But if it's like a standard concrete opening where it's like this kind of setup, it's like I know there's nothing tricky coming here. Like all these are almost autopilot moves, just because I've studied the same opening, which is why I think it's useful to do that for one opening. But you don't need to obviously get lost doing studying every opening. But at least look at your pet line.
Okay, fantastic. So is that it? Are we done with the just looking at the openings, and
Yeah,
we're going to some games now?
yeah, cool. So
Right.
what I did here,
Craig, I'll stop the recording there, and we'll
uh
make it into two separate videos. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully it was refreshing hearing someone else speak. I didn't speak much that video, but I was absolutely loved absorbing all that information. Hope you did too. Like and subscribe. Check out Craig, link in description. See you next time. Cheers.
excellent, thank you.